crossed the line with my army peso, I finally told my dad the truth. I knew something was wrong the moment I landed back home after 8 months overseas. My phone buzzed with a bank alert before I even reached baggage claim. Thousands of dollars had disappeared from my army savings account. At first, I thought it had to be fraud, but the transaction history showed the transfers had come through the family account my dad and I had opened years earlier in case of emergencies while I was deployed. My stomach tightened. That account was supposed to protect my money, not empty it. I drove straight to my father's house without stopping. My stepmother, Linda, was sitting at the kitchen island scrolling through shopping websites. I placed my phone in front of her. "Where did my money go?" I asked. She barely looked at the screen before taking a sip of coffee. "Relax," she said with a smug smile. "Your father and I needed it more than you did. Besides, you're in the army. You'll make more." Her words hit harder than any insult I'd heard during basic training. She wasn't apologizing. She actually believed she had every right to spend the money I had earned risking my life. I wanted to confront my dad immediately, but Linda stepped in front of his office door. "He's busy," she said. "Don't bother him with family finances." Something about the way she said it made me stop. She wasn't protecting him, she was protecting herself. I walked outside, trying to calm down, when my 16-year-old stepsister Emma quietly followed me onto the porch. She looked nervous, constantly glancing back at the house. "She lied to Dad," Emma whispered. "She told him you offered to help pay the bills while you were deployed." I stared at her in disbelief. "I never said that." Emma nodded. "I know. And there's something else." She handed me a folded envelope she had found hidden in Linda's desk. Inside were credit card statements, luxury store receipts, expensive vacations, and jewelry purchases, all paid for with money transferred from my account over the past several months. My hands trembled. My stepmother hadn't taken my army pay because the family was struggling. She had been funding a luxury lifestyle while I was sleeping in tents halfway around the world. Before I could process everything, Dad finally walked outside with a smile on his face, happy to see me home. For a moment, I almost told him everything. But then Linda slipped beside him, wrapped her arm around his, and gave me a warning look that said she already knew what I was thinking. "Your father doesn't need more stress," she said sweetly. Dad looked confused. "What's going on?" I forced a smile and said, "Nothing, not yet." But inside, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to argue with Linda anymore. I was going to uncover every secret she had been hiding, gather undeniable proof, and then tell my father the truth in a way that would change our family forever. What I didn't know was that before I could make my move, someone else was about to knock on my father's front door with information that would expose far more than stolen money. The knock came early the next morning. Linda hurried to answer the door before anyone else could, but she froze the second she saw two men standing on the porch. One wore a dark business suit, the other carried a leather briefcase. "We're looking for Sergeant Ethan Carter," the older man said politely. Linda forced a smile. "He's not available." Before she could close the door, Dad stepped into the hallway. "I'm Ethan's father." "What's this about?" The visitor handed Dad an official envelope. "We're here regarding a military financial review." Some unusual transactions were flagged while Sergeant Carter was deployed overseas. Linda's face lost its color. She quickly interrupted, laughing nervously. "Oh, that's just a misunderstanding. Ethan gave us permission." The man didn't even look at her. "We'll let Sergeant Carter answer that himself." Dad slowly turned toward me. "Is that true?" he asked. Every eye in the room was on me. Linda silently begged me to agree with her story, but I couldn't lie anymore. "No," I said firmly. "I never gave anyone permission to touch my money." The room fell silent. I placed Emma's envelope on the dining table and spread out every receipt, every bank statement, and every transfer record. Dad picked them up one by one. His hands began to shake as he recognized luxury handbags, expensive jewelry, resort vacations, and designer furniture. None of which had anything to do with paying the family's bills. Linda tried to grab the papers away. "Those don't tell the whole story," she shouted. Dad pulled them back. "Then tell me the whole story." Linda opened her mouth but no words came out. Dad looked at me with tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Son, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Before I could answer, the man in the suit reached into his briefcase and removed another document. "There's one more matter you should all know about," he said. "Our investigation uncovered something far more serious than unauthorized withdrawals." Everyone stared at him as he laid the file on the table. Even Linda looked terrified. Whatever was inside that folder was about to destroy the life she had spent years carefully building. The man opened the file slowly and looked directly at my father. "Mr. Carter, the money taken from your son's account wasn't the only issue." He slid several documents across the table. "Over the last 11 months, someone used Sergeant Carter's personal information to apply for multiple lines of credit." Dad's face turned pale as he scanned the paperwork. There were credit cards, personal loans, and financing agreements totaling nearly $80,000, all under my name. I had never seen any of them. My military income and spotless credit had made the applications easy to approve while I was deployed overseas. Dad looked up in disbelief. "Ethan, did you know about any of this?" I slowly shook my head. "Not until today." Linda suddenly jumped to her feet. "This is ridiculous. There has to be some mistake." But the investigator calmly placed another sheet on the table. It contained security camera images from a local bank. The woman signing the loan documents was unmistakably Linda. The room became so quiet that the ticking clock on the kitchen wall sounded deafening. Dad stared at the photographs, then at his wife, unable to recognize the woman standing in front of him. Emma lowered her head and quietly began to cry. Linda kept insisting she had planned to pay everything back, but every excuse sounded weaker than the one before it. Years of lies were collapsing in a matter of minutes. Dad slowly removed his wedding ring and placed it on the table beside the investigation file. His voice was calm, but it carried more disappointment than anger. "You didn't just steal my son's money," he said. "You stole his trust, and mine." Linda reached for him, but he stepped away. Just then another vehicle pulled into the driveway. Through the front window, I saw 2 uniformed officers walking toward the house. The investigator glanced at me before speaking quietly. "Sergeant Carter, they're here because the case has officially become a criminal investigation." As the officers reached for the front door, Linda's confident smile disappeared for the very first time. The officers entered quietly, treating everyone with respect, but their expressions made it clear this was no misunderstanding. One officer asked Linda to step away from the table while the other spoke with me about the fraudulent accounts. I answered every question honestly, explaining that I had been deployed overseas during the dates the loans were opened. The investigator confirmed my military records matched every transaction. There was no way I could have signed those documents in person. Linda's confidence vanished. She looked desperately at Dad, hoping he would defend her, but he couldn't even meet her eyes. He simply stood there, devastated, realizing the woman he had trusted had betrayed his own son. Linda finally broke the silence. "I was going to fix everything," she whispered. "I just needed more time." Dad slowly shook his head. "You had months, and every day you chose another lie." Emma walked over and stood beside me, tears running down her face. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was scared." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "None of this is your fault." The officers informed Linda that she would need to accompany them for questioning. As they escorted her toward the front door, she turned back one last time. "This family will never forgive you for this," she shouted at me. Dad answered before I could. "No, Linda, he's the reason this family still has a chance." After the police vehicles disappeared down the street, the house felt strangely quiet. Dad sat across from me with tears in his eyes. "Son," he said, his voice breaking, "I failed you. I believed every lie because I stopped paying attention to the people who mattered most." Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of my commanding officer. I answered immediately. "Sergeant Carter," he said, "I need you back on base as soon as possible. Something has happened, and it concerns far more than your stolen money." I looked at Dad, then at the road where the police cars had disappeared. Somehow, I knew the hardest part of this story was only beginning. I arrived at the base less than an hour later, expecting more paperwork about the fraud case. Instead, my commanding officer was waiting outside headquarters with two officials I had never met. Their expressions were serious, but not hostile. "Sergeant Carter," my commander said, "this situation has grown beyond identity theft." One of the officials opened a folder and showed me several financial records connected to the accounts Linda had opened in my name. The money hadn't stopped with luxury shopping. Large transfers had been sent to companies that were already under federal investigation for financial crimes. My heart sank. "Are you saying she was involved with them?" I asked. The official nodded. "We're saying your identity may have been used to hide a much larger operation. We need your help to understand how far it goes." I spent the next several hours answering questions, providing deployment records, emails, and every document I had saved over the years. By the end of the interview, the investigators were convinced I had been a victim from the beginning. As I walked out of the building, my phone rang again. It was Dad. His voice sounded exhausted. "Son, I found something in Linda's home office after she left." He paused for a moment before continuing. "There are boxes full of files with your name on them. But they also contain information about other people." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Don't touch anything," I said. lock the room and wait for the investigators. That evening, I returned to the house with federal investigators. They carefully opened the boxes one by one. Inside were stacks of forged documents, fake signatures, bank records, and files belonging to several other victims. One investigator looked up from the evidence and quietly said, "This wasn't a one-time mistake. This appears to have been happening for years." Dad lowered his head, overwhelmed with guilt. Just as the agents began collecting the evidence, one of them pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in handwriting I immediately recognized. It belonged to my late mother. I had never seen that envelope before. Dad stared at it in complete shock and whispered, "Linda told me she destroyed all of your mother's personal papers." My hands trembled as I reached for the unopened letter, knowing whatever was inside could change everything I thought I knew about my family.